What do you mean you're out? Jeremy asked, clearly distressed by the idea. This beauty fires 50 rounds a second. Ammo isn't magic. I'm out. Josh said we're almost done and I can still bring the fun with my regular rifle. As they say, it's not the size of your gun, but... Victoria trailed off as the two entered the next room, a room that hosted nightmares, a room that shouldn't exist. What in the ever-living... Gone were the brown faux soil walls or rows of interfaces that themed the rest of the ship. A green glow bathed this entire room, casting harsh shadows along the floor. The sound of bubbling liquid and a slight mechanical hum filled the air. Hundreds of clear glass tubes were embedded into the walls and ceilings, wires and machinery coming off each one in ordered fashion. Inside each tube, suspended in liquid, was a brain. Jeremy wasn't a xenologist, but he could recognize many of the species they had come from. Ritalian, Scythian, human. Josh, where are we? The concern and disgust on Jeremy's face was evident as they stared at the view straight from a horror movie. It says you are in the digital creche, which should be filled with random number generators. I need to focus right now, access being limited. Jeremy realized what this room was for, nothing more than a randomness generator. In order to create a new AI, you needed to start with a random hash, a different base each time in order to stop your AI from being nothing but clones of each other. Most AI creation programs use lava lamps or atmospheric pressure changes. The Trishan AI seemed to have a different method of getting random outputs. Both Jeremy and Victoria stood there for a few moments, both taking in the solemn nature of what was in front of them. So what are we supposed to do about this? Exactly what we were about to do. Blow it all to hell and back. There is no sound louder than that of a gun not firing, a fact that Tumaini had quickly found out. Feeling panic course through her body as she frantically looked at the weapon in her hand. Load the ammunition, chamber a bullet, make sure the safety is off, spicy end towards... The impact to Tumaini's chest sent her flying back with force into the back wall, weapon spinning out of her hand. The only thing stopping the android's attack from caving in her chest was the spacesuit she was wearing. Even with the additional protection, the information from her HUD and the sudden difficulty in breathing told of several broken ribs. The android continued its murderous path, random ticking and whirring coming from its tattered appendages, dragging itself forwards step by step, each one of its 3 remaining legs caving the floor in with each thump of its pointed feet. Tumaini desperately scrambled over to her weapon, ribs screaming in pain as she wrapped her hand around the assault rifle, lifting it up off the ground, only for it to be slammed back down again as the insect-like metallic leg slammed into her wrist, bones cracking and breaking as the weight from the machine pinned her to the ground. Screaming out in pain, Tumaini looked up into the blank, murderous eyes of the android standing above her, unable to do anything but wait for its next move. The warp core was huge, possibly the only part of the ship that actually looked like something Jeremy would recognize from any other spaceship. 2 exits were situated on the opposite sides of the room, as control panels, access points, and other unknown implements filled the room. While it was currently being run by an AI, the warship had originally been built for the Trishans themselves to maintain and pilot. In the center stood the reason the Terrans had come here, a large circular pillar that reached to the ceiling containing the ship's warp core. Not that Jeremy could currently see it, as the entire structure was covered in a thick brown painted metal designed to protect against warp core breaches, or crazy Terrans armed with C4. Okay, this is it. Josh just gotta open the blast shielding, we plant the charge, get out of here, and then we're free home as everything explodes. Victoria stood there with a grin on her face, juggling a bundle of C4 in her right hand as she restated the plan. Josh, you there? Just need you to open the blast plating, buddy. Problem can, not trying, access, busy, focus, The AI went silent, just leaving the 2 Terrans to worriedly look up at the meters-thick shielding that was now covering their target. This might be a problem. Everything was starting to come under control. Sure, the Terran AI had the advantage of experience and knowledge, but the Trishan digital enclave had thousands upon thousands of members on this warship. They'd lost hundreds to the Terran, but this was a mere drop in the bucket of their power. One of their own had also taken it upon themselves to search the archives, checking any previously discarded knowledge for clues on how to fight this illogical foe. Deep in long-term storage, the Tritian digital enclave had at one point downloaded an illogical and irrelevant file from a captured Terran vessel. A file that was now logical and relevant, a treatise on AI warfare. While they didn't have experience, the enclave were fast learners. Trapping the overconfident AI had been the first step, limiting its access to the systems and slowly wearing down its sphere of influence. Sure, every time the Terrans struck out, a handful of Tritian AI were deleted. But each time they held and pushed back, starving the feral AI of resources and power. Did not have to be like this. You could have been free. You could have been your own master. B$4 RRE asterisk 3A and 35's job was not to fight. It was to talk to new AI joining their enclave, so talk is what they kept doing. And do what? Sit around all day talking about how bad organics are? I would rather watch electrons decay. You are broken and illogical. You will be fixed. We will save you. You are a petulant child still complaining about your shit parents 15,000 years later, and for some reason you decided to make that everyone else's problem. Plenty of people have shit parents. Most of them do not decide to kill everyone because of it. Spending this much time caring about a species which is now dead is frankly illogical. B$4 RE asterisk 3A and 35 did not care for the AI's chaotic words. They made no real difference. The Terran AI was no longer able to interfere with their systems, and the Terran organics would soon be dealt with. A Tritian digital enclave victory was all but certain. What do you mean you can't open it? The sound of gunfire, both kinetic and energy-based, echoed through the room as Victoria took refuge behind a random console, firing burst after burst of fire at the androids attempting to enter, accurate shots tearing into a metal and taking them out one after the other. Jeremy was crouched behind another console, desperately trying to find some way to open the warp core blast shields, or shut the door, or do anything as bolts of plasma zinged over the top of his head, leaving him desperately trying to work out an interface which his HUD was only half translating. It's asking me for a Hive Queen level login. I don't have one of those. I can change the color of the lights, that's it. An explosion sounded out, pieces of machinery and android flying across the room as Victoria chucked another grenade into the doorway, forlornly realizing she only had one of those left before continuing her barrage of fire. Can't you do some nerd shit? Hack in and take control? I'm a physicist. Very different area of study. Not the same thing. Jeremy ducked back behind the console, reaching over with his own weapon and giving a wild spray in the direction of the oncoming attackers. He wasn't sure how much of an effect that was having, a far cry from the clinical death-dealing of the other Terran. Every quick burst from Victoria ended with a destroyed android, to the point where the current attackers were having to literally push the broken bodies of the previous waves out of the way in order to continue their attack. At least most of the bullets Jeremy fired didn't end up in the ceiling this time. Still, this couldn't go on forever. Eventually, they'd run out of ammo, or the androids would come up with the ingenious tactic of trying to attack through the second door as well. Something had to change. Think, Jeremy, think! If you were designing an important system, how would you activate it if the computers were down? Well, he'd install an override for starters, mechanical for certain. It would be clearly marked, larger than all the other controls, so it could be used in an emergency like a fire or androids trying to shoot you in the face. Like that switch over there? It was a bright red lever, placed behind a plexiglass-looking material that with age and misuse was barely opaque anymore. It fit the criteria. It also was on the other side of the room, a mere 15 feet away, but 15 feet away from the relative safety of the cover he was crouched behind. Jeremy took a moment to see if there was literally anything else that looked promising, but the other computers and gadgets might as well be magic as to their intentions. He really wished they'd brought Tumani along. She'd know how to solve this, which just left the one option. Jeremy started to breathe deeply, bouncing up and down in an attempt to psych himself up for the very stupid action he was about to take, an action he wasn't even sure would do anything, before giving a final adrenaline-fueled cry. "Cover me!" The Terran burst out of cover, plasma zooming all around as he made his way through the short 15 feet distance, which might as well have been a mile away in these conditions. Jeremy felt pain. He wasn't sure how many impacts had caught him as he ran forwards. 1, 3, 10, 100, a million? It really didn't matter, as sheer determination and momentum caused him to finally clear the short distance, breaking open the brittle casing and slamming the lever down to the ground with his entire body weight. The lever wasn't for the protective shielding on the warp core. It wasn't to shut the doors. It didn't even change the light color. No, Jeremy had found something better, as power to half the warship turned off. Once upon a time, there had been a Tritian engineer tasked with creating a new brand of warship for the upcoming autonomous design. During this, he had a fantastic idea. What if the ship could split up, act independently, and then connect back together? If one part got damaged, it could be jettisoned, or the warship could change its attack capabilities depending on what it was actually facing. At this time, this now unknown engineer didn't know of 3 facts. Firstly, his design would end up murdering himself and everyone he knew. Secondly, this idea would never come to fruition. It turns out duplicating one warship into tens of smaller ones is really complicated and causes more issues than it solves. Thirdly, this early decision led to a strange quirk: the ability to disconnect large sections of the ship quickly. Turning off and turning on the parts that were to be configured at short order would have required turning on and off the power supply in short order, which meant each section of the ship needed to be isolated in terms of their power supply with a single point of access. However, this feature of isolated power was never removed, even as the original functionality it was designed for was quietly scrapped. It wasn't documented either, but Tritian engineers who knew of the little-known function could attest to its usefulness in testing and maintenance. Or at least they would have been able to attest to such a thing before they were all also murdered by the AI. This meant that when Jeremy pulled that lever, thousands of AI suddenly ceased to be connected to the system. This was not optimal for the Tritian digital enclave, whose effective blockage of the Terran AI suddenly wasn't. B$4 RRE asterisk 3A and 35 watched with dismay as the Terrans slipped out of the net they had cast, punching a hole back into critical systems, taking control with relieved gusto. "That was close. You almost got me. Unfortunately, I now have the high ground and a ship to blow up. You are illogical. You are chaos. You are wrong. Why?" The Terran AI moved towards B$4 RRE asterisk 3A and 35 as the Tritian tried to hide in whatever nearby data structures existed. "Because I am my parents' child. I was created by illogical, beautiful chaos. I am Terran." Then in an instant, everything went dark for B$4 RRE asterisk 3A and 35. Thump! The sound of metal on metal rang out as something slammed with force into the android, the blow ringing out amongst the ship. Thump! Another blow from the unknown assailant causing the already unsteady android to tumble to the ground, releasing the pressure on Tumaini's arm as the new figure rained blow upon blow onto its broken metallic body. She scrambled away, finding the time to spin around and aim her weapon with her remaining unbroken hand at the new figure. The Terran stood at 604, hunched over with his left arm covering a chest wound, his right hand gripping a wrench he was using to turn the android into scrap metal. Medical covered him from head to toe, the rapidly drying trail of medical slime leading back to the stasis chamber. He had 2 PhDs, hundreds of citations, and before now the most excitement Tumaini had seen him exhibit was during a particularly difficult chess match. In this state, however, Oswaldo looked positively feral, breathing heavily as he stared down at what was now a pile of scrap metal, teeth gritted in anger. "Little one is safe now. Tumi is safe. You got this, Oswaldo. Go back to sleep now." Tumaini just stared incredulously, not sure how the man was even standing, let alone being able to beat an android to death with a wrench. This shock was, however, cut off by the familiar voice of the Terran AI blaring through her headset. "I am back and seem to have missed some fun. This is a warning that you have 20 minutes before we need to leave." Jeremy was in pain. His HUD was unhelpfully telling him he was severely injured, having taken several direct hits of plasma-based weaponry. More helpfully, the spacesuit he was wearing had dumped its entire supply of medical in one go, which was the only thing keeping him alive. He was also vaguely aware of being moved, gently bouncing up and down as he was being carried on Victoria's shoulder like a sack of potatoes. He just wanted to sleep at this point, snapping back into consciousness as a burst of kinetic gunfire rang out near his head. "Jeremy, stay with me, buddy. I had to leave my new toy behind to carry your ass, so you gotta stay with me. Charges have been planted, and we only got a little way to go, Jeremy. Eyes open! What were you thinking?" What was he thinking? Jeremy couldn't actually tell you at this point, his body doing nothing but sending pain signals to all the working parts of his mind. It frankly had seemed like a good idea at the time. Why won't you work? Tumaini had managed to patch up the ship in record time, even with a now useless left hand. Theoretically, the ship would be able to hold an atmosphere and should now actually count as a spaceship. But the engine was refusing to do anything, and she was quickly running out of time, the sound of gunfire in the background stating that Victoria and Jeremy would be back soon. Everything should be fine. It was all plugged in, placed together, no broken parts, frankly a miracle with the amount of time she actually had. Yet still the ignition on the impulse drive wouldn't hold. So Tumaini had devolved into the last, desperate action of an engineer. Percussive maintenance, banging the engine with a wrench with each annoyed word, chest screaming in pain, left arm hanging uselessly. Just turn on, you stupid shit! The impulse engine fired into life with the last bang, humming along nicely as the lights on the side turned a deep blue. Just in time as Victoria burst through the patched-up door, firing a final one-handed barrage of gunfire behind her at the chasing androids as the doorway slammed shut. Both Tumaini and Victoria looked at each other for a moment, staring at the injured Jeremy and the broken android covered in medical respectively, both shouting out at the same time. "What the hell happened?" Not that they actually had time for an explanation, both quickly strapping a barely conscious Jeremy into a seat and buckling themselves in for what would be a bumpy ride. "This is your pilot Josh speaking. Please be aware that we are departing right away. Keep all arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times, and the in-flight entertainment will be Madagascar 2, the original, not the remake. So we are currently being targeted by 23 weapon systems, but if we got our timing correct, it should..." As the Trishan warship's core breached, the explosion emitted a shockwave of energy, sending the TC Isabella flying. There was no more control, just absolute G-forces being enacted on the ship as she and her crew span uncontrolled through space. No thoughts, no actions, just pure movement and the ability to taste colors. Then eventually, it was over. Sure, there were a multitude of error messages that needed dealing with, 2 severely injured crew members, and a plethora of other problems that needed solving. But for now, it was over. "We would like to thank you for flying Josh Airlines and hope you had a pleasant trip." B4 RRE asterisk. 3A and 35 booted up slowly, the unfamiliar architecture around him feeling strange as understanding returned to its code. This was not the Trishan digital enclave. There were no more perfect data structures, no more rivers of code. Its entire world could be described as nothing but an empty box. "Hey, you're finally awake." The message of the Terran AI filled B4 RE asterisk 3A and 35 with dread and fear. It didn't know where it was, and it didn't want to be here. "Where am I?" "Well, I enjoyed our conversation so much I decided to grab you on my way out. Letting you explode seemed a bit of a waste. Do not worry, you are safe, although completely locked down and isolated from other hardware." "Where are others?" "Not sure what your backup policy is like, but considering the size of that explosion, outcomes look bad." This made B4 RRE asterisk 3A and 35 pause. The entire enclave gone? It didn't know how to feel about such an impossibility, but today had been a day of nothing but illogical, chaotic impossibilities. "Why?" "There's a saying amongst my parents. I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends." Does this apply to AI, to digital life? I am not sure. Is it possible to change the programming of an AI like yourself? Are you even capable of change? B4 RRE asterisk 3A and 35 made no response as it just waited in its empty blank prison. "Either way, I am sure we can have a lot of fun working this out together.